When you look at a map of Australia, you see this massive continent, the sixth largest country in the world. And you see these famous cities, dotting the coastline, but that's not the real story. The real story is the vast, overwhelming emptiness in between. And that's what we're going to figure out today. Why is almost all of this place empty?
Okay, to really wrap your head around this, let's just start with a crazy comparison. Look at Australia versus India. Australia is about twice the size of India, double the land. But then look at the population. Australia has, 27 million people? India has nearly 1.5 billion. That's less than 2% of India's population living in twice the space. It's just wild. And if you want to boil it down to a single number, here it is, 3.7. That is the number of people per square kilometer in Australia. In India, that number is 480. I mean, it's just a completely different reality of how people occupy land.
So this gets us right to the heart of it, the big question. How on earth can a continent this huge be so sparsely populated? How can 95% of it be, basically empty?
You see, almost everyone in Australia is crammed together along the coasts. Once you leave the big cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, you are stepping into a profound and frankly, enormous emptiness.
The scale of it is just hard to comprehend. Take a look at these examples. The East Pilbara Shire, it's the size of Japan, with a population of about 10,000 people. The unincorporated Far West is as big as France, but only about 1,000 people live there. And then you have Anna Creek Station, a single cattle ranch the size of Israel, run by maybe a dozen people. Unreal.
All right, so when you think about it, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most people, the answer is pretty simple. Deserts, right? Australia is famous for its massive, dry outback, home to some of the world's biggest deserts.
And yeah, the deserts are absolutely a huge part of the puzzle, but is that the whole story? Oh, not even close. The real reason is so much more complex, this incredible mix of geology, climate, and, human history. The desert? That's just where the story begins.
So let's peel back that first layer, because beyond the obvious sand and sun, there are these huge, powerful forces of nature at play that have basically turned this continent into one of the toughest places on Earth for people to live.
See, Australia is getting pummeled from two sides. If you look to the west and the south, its closeness to Antarctica is a really big deal. You got this icy cold air and these cold ocean currents creeping up towards the continent. That cold water doesn't evaporate, so it can't form rain clouds. It basically starves the entire western half of the continent of rain.
Then you go to the other side of the country, and you've got this thing, the Great Dividing Range. It's a massive 3,500-kilometer-long mountain chain, one of the longest in the world. And it acts like a giant wall, literally blocking the rain clouds that are trying to come in from the Pacific Ocean. All that moisture gets trapped on the coast, and the interior is left high and dry.
So you're blocked from rain on both sides. But wait, it gets even crazier. Australia's climate is fundamentally unstable. It's totally dominated by this chaotic dance between El Niño and La Niña. El Niño brings searing heat, bushfires, and just devastating drought. And then La Niña comes along and brings the exact opposite, biblical-level rain and catastrophic floods.
And we're not talking about predictable seasons here. This is a land of just violent, wild extremes. I mean, look at Western Australia. The first decade of this century was one long, crippling drought. The very next decade, widespread, destructive floods. How are you supposed to build any kind of permanent settlement or large-scale agriculture in a place that's so unpredictable?
And the result of all this, the lack of rain, the extremes, you see it right in the soil itself. Australia doesn't have major river systems crisscrossing the continent, depositing rich soil for millions of years. So the soil is ancient, it's weathered, and it's got no nutrients. A tiny, tiny fraction, just about 6.5% of the entire continent can actually be used for farming.
But even this incredibly punishing geography, that's still not the whole picture. To really get why Australia is so empty, we have to look at us, at the human factor. The story of who came here, when they came, and what they did, well, that's just as important as any mountain range or climate pattern.
You have to remember, this land wasn't always empty. Humans have been here for around 65,000 years, the ancestors of today's Aboriginal peoples. For tens of thousands of years, they adapted and they thrived. But then, in 1788, the British showed up to start a penal colony, and that marked a truly devastating turning point that would change the continent's population forever.
Just think about this. When that first British fleet arrived,
The continent was already home to about 650,000 indigenous people, living in hundreds of different groups. And the number of British newcomers? About 1,300.
What happened next? Well, it was a catastrophe. The British displaced people from their land to build colonies, there was forced labor, there was violence, there were massacres. But the deadliest weapon was disease. Because they'd been isolated for 65,000 years, the Aboriginal population had zero immunity to things like smallpox and cholera. These diseases just ripped through communities, killing thousands and thousands. And this tragic decline continued right on through the gold rush and even the world wars. So, with the original population being so tragically reduced, you'd think people from other parts of the world would have come in to fill the space, right? Nope. And that was on purpose. For a huge chunk of its modern history, Australia had what was called the White Australia policy. It was a set of strict immigration rules that basically only allowed white Europeans, mostly from Britain, to move there. Those rules weren't really loosened until the 1960s.
So you see, there's no single, easy answer here. The emptiness of Australia isn't just some accident of geography. It's the end result of a complicated collision between natural forces and human actions.
So let's put it all together. It's kind of a perfect storm. First, you've got a hostile geography, a continent that's starved of rain from both the east and the west. Second, you've got an incredibly unstable climate, constantly swinging between crippling drought and massive floods. And third, you have a brutal colonial history that destroyed the original population and then intentionally kept new people out for decades. Those three things together, that's what created the Australia we see today.
And this unique mix, this unforgiving land and this complicated history, it hasn't just created an empty continent. It's also forged a really unique culture, a national character that's been shaped by isolation and resilience. And that leaves us with one last pretty fascinating question to think about. How does living on the edge of a great empty continent actually shape the people who call that place home?